You lie still, and yet nothing inside you is truly still. Beneath the quiet of your closed eyes, your brain remains awake in its own gentle way, humming softly like a city scene from far above at night. There is no urgency in it, no flashing alarms or rushing crowds. Just a slow, patient glow of activity, steady and unafraid of the dark. You are not directing it now, and you do not need to. Your brain knows how to continue without instruction. Imagine it as a wide landscape, stretching beyond the edges of your awareness. Valleys of memory, hills of habit, rivers of sensation moving calmly through familiar channels. Every thought you have ever had has left a faint trace here, like footsteps pressed into soft earth. Some paths are deep and easy to follow. Others are barely visible, almost forgotten, yet still present. Your brain carries them all without judgment. As you rest, tiny electrical signals travel across this inner terrain. They move along neurons, the brain's messengers, passing information the way lantern light passes from one window to the next. When two neurons communicate often, their connection grows stronger, as if a well-worn trail is being cleared and widened. When they speak less, the trail softens, grass slowly returning. This is not something you have to force. It is simply how your brain responds to experience. You may have been told once that the brain is fixed, that who you are is settled early and sealed tight. But science has learned something gentler. Your brain is plastic, not in the sense of being artificial, but in the sense of being moldable. It changes shape quietly, constantly, responding to how you live, what you repeat, what you attend to, and what you allow to fade. Even now, in rest, it is adjusting itself. There is comfort in knowing that change does not arrive all at once. Your brain does not expect sudden transformation. It learns the way the body learns to breathe, gradually, rhythmically, without effort. Each inhale and exhale subtly reshapes the muscles of your chest. Each repeated thought, each familiar feeling, subtly reshapes the circuits of your mind. Nothing dramatic needs to happen for something meaningful to change. As night deepens, your brain shifts into a different mode of work. Regions responsible for alertness soften their activity, while others step forward. The brain begins to replay moments from your day, not as a movie, but as patterns. It looks for what matters, what repeats, what carries emotion. These moments are strengthened, stitched gently into memory. Others are loosened, their edges softened so they no longer demand attention. You are not reliving your day on purpose, but your brain is still listening to it. This is how learning continues while you sleep. Scientists observe this quiet reshaping and call it consolidation, but you can imagine it more simply as tidying. The brain sorts experiences the way hands smooth sheets on a bed, pressing out sharp folds, arranging things so rest can come more easily. Even unfamiliar ideas follow the same path. When you encounter something new, your brain does not reject it outright. It compares it to what already exists, searching for connection. If the idea feels safe, if it repeats gently, it begins to settle in. Over time, it finds a place. This is how change enters your life without announcing itself. Your brain is also deeply responsive to emotion. Feelings act like highlighters, marking certain experiences as important. Joy, fear, curiosity, each leaves a different kind of imprint. But even these emotional marks are not permanent. With time and repetition, their intensity can fade or soften. The brain learns from what you feel, but it is not trapped by it. As you breathe slowly, you send signals downward from mind to body and back again. Your heart rate eases. Muscles loosen. These physical changes speak directly to your brain, telling it that the environment is safe. In response, it shifts again, favoring repair, reflection, and quiet growth. The conversation between brain and body never truly stops. You may notice that thoughts still drift in and out. This does not mean your mind is restless or failing at rest. It means your brain is still doing what it does best, responding. Thoughts rise like bubbles in water, touch the surface, and disappear. You do not need to follow them. Your brain does not require your supervision right now. What matters is that beneath these passing thoughts, deeper processes continue. Connections that serve you are gently reinforced. Others that no longer fit begin to loosen. This is not a judgment. It is adaptation. Your brain's purpose is not perfection, but usefulness. It reshapes itself to support the life you are living. You are not late for this process. You have not missed your chance. The brain you carry is built for change across an entire lifetime. Age does not end this ability. Habit does not erase it. Even long-held patterns can soften with time, attention, and repetition. The brain never sleeps because it never gives up on learning how to support you. As you rest here, you are already participating. Your stillness is information. Your breath is instruction. Your calm is a signal that guides internal shifts you may never consciously witness. And that is enough. You do not need to strive tonight. Your brain has been waiting patiently for moments like this. Somewhere within that glowing landscape, faint paths are already adjusting, responding to what you repeatedly think, feel, and do. And as sleep draws closer, you may begin to sense that these paths are not fixed roads at all, but soft ground, ready to be shaped by the steps you take next. You move forward without effort, as if the ground itself is meeting you halfway. There is no map in your hands, no sign pointing the way, only the quiet sensation of walking. Beneath your feet, the earth is soft. Each step leaves a faint impression, barely visible at first, but real. This is how change begins in the brain, not with force or urgency, but with gentle contact repeated over time. Your brain learns in much the same way a path forms through a forest. The first time someone walks through tall grass, the trail almost disappears behind them. The second time, it bends a little more easily. With enough passing steps, the ground remembers. The plants lean aside. The way forward becomes familiar. Neuroplasticity works like this, responding not to intention alone, but to repetition paired with presence. Inside your brain, billions of neurons wait for signals. They reach toward one another through tiny branches, forming connections called synapses. When you think a thought, practice a skill, or respond to a feeling in a familiar way, certain neurons fire together. And when they fire together often enough, the connection between them strengthens. Scientists say they wire together, but you can imagine it as two friends learning the rhythm of walking side by side. Nothing about this process is loud. There is no sudden click that announces a new habit has formed. Instead, change arrives quietly, like dawn light filling a room before you notice it. One day, a reaction feels slightly easier. Another day, a behavior feels more natural. These moments are signs that a pathway has deepened beneath your awareness. The brain does not punish you for inconsistency. It simply responds to patterns. If a behavior fades, the pathway softens. If it returns, the path firms up again. This flexibility is not weakness. It is generosity. Your brain is designed to adapt to what you practice now, not to trap you in what you practiced before. You may notice that some paths feel automatic. These are the ones you have walked many times. They guide your reactions, your thoughts, your emotional responses. The brain prefers efficiency, and well-worn pathways save energy. This is why habits can feel comforting, even when they no longer serve you. They are familiar terrain. But new paths are always possible. The brain never closes the forest. When you repeat something new, pausing before reacting, choosing a different thought, practicing a small behavior, you begin to press fresh ground. At first, it takes attention. You may forget. You may wander back to the old trail. This is not failure. It is simply gravity pulling you toward familiarity. With time, something subtle shifts. The new path no longer feels foreign. The brain starts to predict it. Neurons fire more easily along this route. What once required effort begins to feel neutral, then comfortable. This is the moment when change feels real, not because it is dramatic, but because it is no longer loud. Your brain responds especially well to gentleness. Stress and pressure release chemicals that narrow attention and favor survival pathways. Calm, safety, and repetition release chemicals that encourage growth and flexibility. When you approach change without threat, the brain opens itself to learning. It listens more closely. This is why small habits matter. A single deep breath taken often. A moment of awareness repeated daily. A thought gently redirected again and again. These are not insignificant actions. They are instructions. Each repetition tells your brain, this matters. Remember this. Even rest plays a role here. When you sleep, the brain revisits the pathways you used during the day. It strengthens some, trims others, and integrates new ones with old knowledge. Rest is not passive. It is part of the rewiring process. The forest reorganizes itself while you are not watching. You may find comfort in knowing that you do not have to erase old paths to create new ones. The brain does not demand destruction. It allows coexistence. Old habits may remain visible even as new ones grow stronger. Over time, attention naturally chooses the easier route. The brain follows what feels most practiced. This is also why patience matters. You cannot rush rewiring. Trying to force change often strengthens the very pathways you want to soften, because frustration itself becomes a repeated signal. Gentle persistence, however, teaches the brain that change is safe. And safety invites flexibility. Your identity is not carved into stone here. It is written in pencil, rewritten with experience. Who you are is shaped by what you practice, not by what you promise yourself. The brain believes action more than intention. Each small, repeated choice becomes part of the terrain. As you continue this quiet walk, you may sense that the forest is alive with possibility. Paths you have not yet imagined wait in the shadows. They do not demand attention. They simply exist, ready to form when you begin stepping in their direction. You do not need to see the whole route. The brain does not plan that way. It responds step by step, moment by moment. Each repetition is enough. Each gentle return to the path matters. And as you rest with this idea, you may notice something else emerging, something even quieter than habit itself, the role of attention. Because every path begins not with movement, but with where you choose to place your awareness, and how long you let it rest there. You arrive at something quieter now, something subtler than movement or habit. You arrive at attention. Not the sharp, effortful kind that strains and tightens, but the soft, resting kind that simply stays. Attention is not force. It is presence. And in the brain, presence is powerful. Imagine your brain as warm clay, not wet or fragile, but gently responsive. It does not collapse under pressure. It reshapes itself slowly, responding to what touches it again and again. Attention is the hand that rests on this clay. Wherever it lingers, the shape begins to change. Your brain treats attention as a signal of importance. When you notice something repeatedly, neurons respond. They fire more often. Connections strengthen. When you stop noticing something, those signals quiet. The brain does not argue. It listens. It assumes that what you attend to matters. This happens whether you mean it to or not. Worry shapes the brain because it holds attention. Calm shapes the brain because it holds attention too. The brain does not rank thoughts by truth or usefulness. It ranks them by repetition and focus. You may have noticed how thoughts seem to pull you along, as if they have momentum. A single idea appears, then another follows, then another. It can feel automatic, even inevitable. But what actually fuels this motion is attention. The moment attention rests on a thought, the brain adds energy to it. This does not mean thoughts control you. It means attention feeds them. And what feeds can grow. When you begin to observe thoughts without following them, something interesting happens. The thought still appears, but it no longer multiplies. Without attention, it softens. It loses weight. The brain receives fewer signals to reinforce that pathway. This is not suppression. Suppression tightens attention through resistance. This is release. Attention moves away, gently, without judgment. The brain feels the difference. It responds differently. Attention also shapes emotion. When you stay with a feeling calmly, without pushing it away or amplifying it with stories, the brain processes it more efficiently. Emotional circuits complete their cycle. Stress chemicals rise, peak, and fall. The brain learns that feelings move. They are not permanent states. You may notice that when attention is scattered, the mind feels restless. When attention settles, even briefly, the body responds. Breathing deepens. Muscles loosen. Heart rhythms smooth. These physical changes send messages back to the brain, reinforcing the sense of safety. Attention becomes a loop of calm. Neuroscience shows that attention changes activity in the brain's networks. Regions involved in focus grow stronger with practice. Regions tied to distraction quiet down. This is not about becoming rigid or hyper-focused. It is about flexibility. The brain learns to place attention where it is needed, and release it when it is not. Gentle attention is especially effective. Harsh focus activates stress responses that narrow perception. Soft attention widens awareness. It allows the brain to take in information without alarm. This is the state in which learning happens best. You may think of attention as something you either have or do not have. But it is more like a muscle that responds to use. Short moments matter. A few seconds of noticing the breath. A brief pause before reacting. These moments train the brain without exhausting it. Over time, attention becomes steadier. Not because thoughts stop, but because you stop chasing them. The brain begins to recognize that it does not need to amplify every signal. Some thoughts can pass through like clouds. This is how attention reshapes identity. If you consistently attend to self-criticism, the brain strengthens that narrative. If you attend to effort, growth, or kindness, those pathways deepen instead. Identity is not what appears in the mind. It is what attention returns to. Even now, as you rest, attention drifts and settles. You may notice sounds, sensations, or images. Each moment of noticing is shaping the brain. There is no wasted awareness. Everything attended to leaves a trace. You do not need perfect control. The brain does not require constant focus. It responds to trends, not moments. Where attention goes most often is what matters. As attention softens, time begins to feel different. Urgency loosens. Thoughts slow. The brain shifts into a mode that favors integration rather than reaction. This is the state where deeper change takes root. You may begin to feel curious about attention itself. Where does it rest most often? What does it avoid? These questions are not meant to be answered tonight. Simply noticing them is enough. The brain is remarkably responsive to this noticing. Awareness of attention creates space. In that space, choice becomes possible. Not forceful choice, but gentle redirection. As sleep approaches, attention naturally narrows. External signals fade. Internal rhythms take over. This is not loss of awareness. It is a shift. Attention turns inward, toward memory, emotion, and integration. The brain uses this inward attention to review patterns. What was repeated today? What held focus? These are the pathways that receive reinforcement. Attention continues shaping the clay even as consciousness softens. You may feel comfort in knowing that nothing needs to be fixed right now. Simply resting attention is enough. The brain understands stillness as instruction. And as attention grows quieter, something else begins to emerge in the background, something patient and steady, something that works without thought or effort at all. Because once attention has shaped the clay, it is repetition that returns, again and again, to gently set the form. You begin to sense it now, this quiet force that has been shaping you all along. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It works in the background, steady and unhurried. Repetition is not dramatic, but it is powerful. It is the architect your brain trusts most. Think of the shore where waves meet stone. No single wave changes the rock. Not the strongest one, not the loudest. But the endless return does. Over time, sharp edges soften. Corners round. What once resisted slowly yields. Your brain responds in the same way. It is not impressed by intensity. It is persuaded by consistency. Each time you repeat a thought, a behavior, or an emotional response, you send the same message inward. Neurons respond by firing in familiar patterns. With enough repetition, those patterns require less energy. The brain learns, this is the way things usually go. And because the brain values efficiency, it begins to favor these routes automatically. This is how habits form. Not as rules imposed from the outside, but as rhythms the brain adopts because they feel familiar. Habits are not moral choices in the brain. They are pathways reinforced by use. When you understand this, something softens. You stop blaming yourself for having them. You begin to see them as evidence of repetition, nothing more. Repetition is neutral. It does not judge what it builds. It strengthens what is practiced often, whether that practice is helpful or not. Worry becomes familiar because it repeats. Calm becomes familiar the same way. The brain does not distinguish between them based on value, only on frequency. This can feel unsettling at first. But there is comfort here too. Because if repetition created old patterns, repetition can also reshape them. The same quiet architect that built the current structure can renovate it, slowly, patiently, without tearing everything down. The brain does not require grand gestures. It responds best to small, repeatable actions. A single deep breath taken every evening. A brief pause before responding. A kind thought practiced daily. These actions may feel insignificant in the moment, but repetition gives them weight. Over time, repeated actions change how the brain predicts the world. Prediction is one of the brain's main jobs. It constantly asks, what usually happens next? Repetition answers that question. If calm often follows a pause, the brain begins to expect calm. If kindness often follows a mistake, the brain learns safety. This is why rituals can feel grounding. A ritual is simply repetition with intention. The brain recognizes it as familiar territory. Familiarity reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty lowers stress. And lower stress opens the door to learning and flexibility. Repetition also works best when paired with gentleness. Harsh repetition creates tension. Gentle repetition creates trust. When the brain feels safe, it is more willing to update its patterns. Safety tells the nervous system that change will not threaten survival. You may notice resistance when you try to repeat something new. This resistance is not sabotage. It is the brain favoring efficiency. Old pathways are easier because they are well-worn. New ones feel awkward because they are not yet familiar. This discomfort is temporary. It fades as repetition continues. The brain does not need you to repeat perfectly. Inconsistency does not erase progress. What matters is the overall pattern. Trends outweigh moments. Returning again and again is enough. Repetition also interacts with attention. What you repeat while paying attention strengthens more quickly. But even repetition without conscious focus still leaves a mark. The brain notices what happens often, whether you are watching or not. Sleep plays a role here too. During rest, the brain revisits repeated patterns from the day. It strengthens frequently used connections and trims unused ones. This pruning is not loss. It is refinement. The brain is making room for what you practice most. Over time, repetition shapes identity. You begin to feel like someone who does certain things naturally. Not because you decided to be that person once, but because repetition made it familiar. Identity becomes the story the brain tells based on what it sees repeated. This can be freeing. You are not required to reinvent yourself all at once. You can practice being slightly different, repeatedly. The brain will take care of the rest. As you rest with this idea, you may feel a sense of patience growing. There is no rush here. Repetition works on its own timeline. It respects gradual change. It does not demand immediate results. The quiet architect keeps working whether you watch it or not. Each day adds a layer. Each night reinforces it. Over weeks and months, structures emerge that feel solid, even inevitable. And yet, they are always adjustable. Because repetition never truly stops. Whatever you practice tomorrow will continue shaping the structure. As you settle into sleep, repetition begins its night work. Breathing repeats. Heartbeats repeat. Neural signals repeat familiar rhythms. These cycles are not boring to the brain. They are soothing. They signal stability. In this steady rhythm, the brain continues refining itself. Not through effort, but through return. Again and again. And as repetition quietly sets the form, something else begins to join the process, something physical, something embodied. Because the brain does not learn only through thought. It also listens closely to the body, to movement and stillness alike, waiting to be taught in another language. You begin to notice the body now, not as something separate from the mind, but as its closest companion. Every sensation, every movement, every shift in posture sends information upward, quietly shaping the brain's understanding of the world. The brain does not live only in the head. It listens constantly to the body, learning from how you move through space. Movement is one of the oldest teachers the brain knows. Long before language, long before abstract thought, the brain learned through motion. Reaching, walking, balancing, breathing. These actions shaped neural circuits that still guide learning today. When you move, the brain pays attention. As muscles contract and release, sensory signals travel along nerves toward the brain. These signals carry information about position, effort, and rhythm. The brain uses them to update its internal map of the body and environment. This map is not static. It reshapes itself with every movement you make. Even gentle motion has an effect. A slow walk sends a steady rhythm upward, encouraging coordination between brain regions. Blood flow increases, delivering oxygen and nutrients that support neural activity. Chemicals linked to mood and focus begin to circulate. Movement becomes nourishment. You may have noticed that ideas arrive more easily when you walk. Thoughts loosen. Problems soften. This is not coincidence. Walking engages networks involved in memory and creativity. The brain seems to think better when the body is in motion, as if movement gives thoughts room to stretch. Stillness teaches too. When the body rests, the brain receives different signals. muscles release. Breathing deepens. The nervous system shifts toward restoration. This balance between movement and stillness trains the brain to regulate energy, to know when to act and when to recover. The brain learns patterns from the body. If movement is rushed and tense, the brain interprets urgency. If movement is smooth and deliberate, the brain senses safety. Over time, these physical patterns influence emotional and cognitive habits. The body becomes a script the brain reads daily. This is why small physical habits matter. Stretching upon waking. Sitting upright and relaxed. Slowing the breath. These actions are not merely physical. They are instructions. They teach the brain how to organize itself. Movement also strengthens learning through repetition. Practicing a skill physically, typing, playing an instrument, writing, creates robust neural pathways. The brain binds thought to action. Memory becomes embodied, not abstract. Even imagined movement activates similar circuits. When you picture yourself moving, the brain rehearses the pattern. This mental rehearsal supports learning and recovery. The boundary between thought and movement is softer than it seems. As you rest now, subtle movements continue. Breath rises and falls. The heart pulses steadily. These rhythms send continuous feedback to the brain, reinforcing stability. The brain responds by synchronizing its activity, creating a sense of calm coherence. You do not need intense exercise to benefit. The brain responds to consistency, not strain. Gentle movement repeated over time is enough to reshape neural patterns. The body speaks softly, but the brain listens closely. There is wisdom in noticing how movement feels rather than how it looks. The brain values sensation over appearance. Ease, balance, rhythm, these are the qualities that support healthy rewiring. As sleep approaches, movement slows naturally. The body prepares to rest. But the lessons of movement remain, woven into neural circuits. The brain carries them forward into the night. And as the body settles, another phase begins. Because when movement pauses completely, the brain enters its most private workshop, where rest itself becomes an active force of change. You cross a threshold now, one so familiar you barely notice it. Wakefulness softens. Thoughts slow. The edges of awareness blur. But inside your brain, activity does not fade. It changes shape. Sleep is not an ending. It is a shift in labor. As you fall asleep, the brain reorganizes itself. Networks responsible for external attention quiet down. Others, more inward-facing, become active. The brain turns from the world and toward itself, reviewing, adjusting, and repairing. Sleep unfolds in cycles, each with its own purpose. In deeper stages, the brain slows its electrical rhythm. Neurons fire in coordinated waves, like a tide moving through the cortex. These waves support restoration, clearing metabolic waste that builds up during waking hours. Rest becomes maintenance. Memory begins to transform. Experiences from the day are replayed, not exactly as they happened, but as patterns. The brain extracts meaning, strengthens useful connections, and weakens others. This is consolidation, but it feels more like integration. The brain decides what to keep. Emotional memories receive special attention. Feelings that carried intensity are revisited in a calmer chemical environment. Stress hormones drop. The brain processes emotion without the same charge. This is why sleep can soften the edges of difficult days. Dreaming emerges from this process. Dreams are not random stories. They are the brain weaving fragments together, testing connections, blending memory and emotion. You can imagine dreams as librarians, sorting experiences into the right shelves. During dreaming, the brain is highly active, especially in areas linked to imagination and emotion. Logic relaxes. Narrative flows. This freedom allows new associations to form. Problems loosen. Creativity deepens. The brain explores without risk. Rest also supports learning at a cellular level. Synapses adjust their strength. Some connections grow more efficient. Others are pruned back. This pruning is essential. It prevents overload. It keeps the system flexible. You do not need to remember any of this for it to work. Sleep does not require effort or awareness. The brain knows what to do. Your role is simply to allow rest to happen. Even brief rest periods have value. Short naps, moments of deep relaxation, quiet pauses all signal the brain to shift into maintenance mode. The nervous system responds with gratitude. As sleep deepens, the sense of self loosens. Boundaries soften. Time becomes fluid. This loss of structure is not disorientation. It is recovery. The brain steps out of constant monitoring and into renewal. You may wake feeling different without knowing why. This is the effect of unseen work. Connections have shifted. Emotional weight has redistributed. Learning has settled deeper. Sleep also prepares the brain for change tomorrow. A rested brain adapts more easily. It learns faster. It regulates emotion more smoothly. Rest is not the opposite of productivity. It is its foundation. As you lie here now, breathing slow and even, your brain has already begun. Signals flow along familiar routes, strengthening what you practiced, softening what you did not. The night shift is underway. Nothing from today is wasted. Everything has been received, sorted, and gently reshaped. The brain carries forward what matters. And as this quiet work continues, another layer of learning waits its turn. Because once rest has done its work, the brain will turn again to emotion, to feeling as information, preparing to listen more closely to the messages carried in the heart. You turn now towards something that has always been close, something that often feels powerful and confusing at the same time. Emotion. Not as a problem to solve, not as noise to quiet, but as a signal the brain has learned to listen to since the very beginning. Emotions are not mistakes in the system. They are part of the system itself. Before thought forms words, before logic organizes meaning, emotion speaks. It arrives as sensation first. A tightening. A warmth. A lift. A heaviness. The brain receives these sensations as information, clues about safety, connection, and need. Emotion is the body and brain speaking in a shared language. Inside the brain, emotions arise from networks that link memory, sensation, and prediction. When something matters, neurons fire together, releasing chemicals that shift attention and energy. Joy widens perception. Fear narrows it. Sadness slows things down. These changes are not random. They are adaptive responses shaped over time. The brain does not label emotions as good or bad. It treats them as data. Each feeling answers an internal question. Is this safe? Is this important? Should I move closer or step away? Emotion helps the brain decide what to prioritize. Trouble begins only when emotion is resisted or misunderstood. When a feeling appears and is pushed away, the brain receives mixed signals. The emotion continues firing, seeking resolution. Attention tightens. The loop repeats. The feeling grows louder, not because it is dangerous, but because it has not been acknowledged. When you allow a feeling to exist without judgment, something shifts. Attention rests on sensation instead of story. The brain processes the signal more efficiently. Chemicals rise and fall as they are meant to. The emotion completes its cycle. This is not indulgence. It is regulation. The brain is built to move emotions through, not to hold them indefinitely. Acknowledgement is the release valve. Neuroscience shows that naming or noticing emotion can reduce its intensity. Awareness activates regions of the brain that support integration and calm. You are not suppressing the feeling. You are helping the brain understand it. Emotion also shapes memory. Experiences paired with strong feeling are stored more deeply. This is how learning sticks. The brain remembers what carried emotion because it mattered at the time. But this also means emotional patterns can repeat if they are revisited often. Gentle awareness can soften these patterns. When the brain learns that an emotion can be felt without danger, it updates its prediction. The same feeling may arise again, but with less intensity. Safety has been learned. The body plays a role here too. Emotions are not abstract. They are physical states. Heart rate changes. Breath shifts. Muscles tighten or release. When you slow the body, you send calming signals back to the brain. The emotion follows. This is why simple acts like breathing slowly or relaxing the shoulders can influence mood. You are speaking directly to the emotional centers of the brain in their native language. Over time, the brain begins to associate emotions with flow rather than threat. Feelings come and go like weather. None need to be permanent. This understanding is not intellectual. It is learned through repeated experience of safe acknowledgement. You may notice that some emotions feel more familiar than others. These are the ones you have practiced. Repeated emotional responses become well-worn pathways. The brain predicts them easily. But prediction does not mean destiny. New emotional responses can be learned. When you meet a familiar trigger with a different response, the brain takes note. At first, the old pattern may still dominate. But repetition teaches alternatives. Emotional plasticity is real. This is especially important at night. As sleep approaches, emotional processing becomes more active. The brain revisits feelings from the day, but without the same chemical charge. This is how emotional memory is reshaped. Dreams often reflect this work. Emotions appear symbolically, woven into stories. The brain experiments with resolution, exploring different outcomes. You do not need to interpret dreams for this to help. The process itself is beneficial. Rest allows emotions to settle. Without constant stimulation, the nervous system resets. Baseline calm becomes easier to reach. The brain learns that intensity is temporary. You may feel relief knowing that emotions do not need fixing. They need space. Space allows movement. Movement allows resolution. Even difficult emotions carry wisdom. Fear protects. Sadness honors loss. Anger signals boundaries. When these messages are received, the emotion can step back. Its job is done. As you rest here, emotions may still pass through. This is normal. Notice them like ripples on water. No need to dive in. No need to push away. The brain understands this posture. It responds with balance. Over time, this gentle relationship with emotion changes how the brain responds overall. Reactivity softens. Recovery speeds up. Calm becomes more accessible, not because emotions disappear, but because they are allowed. And as this calm deepens, another process quietly prepares itself. Because once emotions have been felt and released, the brain turns its attention toward learning, toward memory, toward how experience is stored and recalled, waiting to explore how understanding grows when urgency fades. You arrive now at the place where learning settles and memory takes shape. Not as a sharp flash, not as something forced into place, but as a slow echo moving gently through the mind. The brain does not learn best when it is rushed. It learns best when it feels safe enough to linger. Memory is not a storage room where facts are stacked and labeled. It is more like a weaving. Threads of sensation, emotion, repetition, and meaning cross and recross, strengthening where they meet often. What you remember deeply is not what you cram, but what you return to. The brain prefers patterns to isolated details. A single fact may pass through unnoticed, but a story invites connection. Stories carry sequence, emotion, and context. They give the brain something to hold on to. This is why you remember moments, not lists. The brain is always asking how things relate. Learning slowly allows these relationships to form. When information arrives gently, the brain has time to link it with what already exists. New ideas find familiar anchors. Understanding grows outward rather than being pressed inward. Mistakes play an important role here. The brain treats mistakes as information, not as evidence of failure. When something does not work, prediction is challenged. The brain updates its model of the world. Learning happens in this gap between expectation and outcome. Pressure interferes with this process. When urgency rises, stress chemicals flood the brain. Attention narrows. The brain prioritizes survival over integration. Learning becomes shallow, brittle, easily lost. This is not a flaw. It is protection. When urgency fades, curiosity returns. Curiosity opens pathways associated with exploration and memory. The brain becomes receptive again. Information settles more deeply, weaving itself into existing networks. You may have noticed that understanding sometimes arrives later, unexpectedly. A concept that felt confusing suddenly becomes clear. This is delayed integration. The brain continues working after exposure, rearranging information quietly until it fits. Sleep supports this process. During rest, the brain revisits what it encountered. It strengthens useful connections and releases others. Memory shifts from fragile to stable. Learning moves from effort to ease. Repetition helps too, but only when paired with rest. Repetition without pause exhausts the system. Repetition with rest builds it. The brain needs both signal and silence. You do not need to remember everything. Forgetting is not failure. Forgetting is selection. The brain keeps what proves useful over time. This makes memory efficient, not incomplete. Emotion influences what is remembered. Experiences paired with feeling leave stronger traces. But gentle emotion works better than intense stress. Calm interest, quiet satisfaction, and curiosity support long-term learning. The brain also learns through meaning. When information connects to your life, your body, your experience, it sticks. Abstract facts float away. Lived understanding remains. This is why learning can feel personal. The brain is not a neutral observer. It filters information through relevance. What matters to you shapes what stays. As you rest now, memories may drift in fragments. Images, phrases, sensations. This is normal. The brain is touching old threads, checking their strength. Some will fade. Others will glow faintly brighter. You do not need to organize this process. The brain knows how to learn. It has been doing so since before language. Trusting its pace allows deeper integration. Slow learning also reshapes identity. When you give yourself time, you begin to see growth not as performance, but as accumulation. Small insights build quietly. Confidence grows without announcement. You may notice that when you stop rushing, understanding feels warmer, less brittle, more forgiving. This is the brain learning in its preferred environment. As sleep deepens, memory consolidation continues. The brain practices what it wants to keep. Learning settles into muscle, into intuition, into familiarity. Nothing you have learned today is lost. It is resting, waiting to be called forward when needed. Memory is patient. And as this patience grows, the mind begins to notice something else about itself. Patterns of thought that repeat. Loops that circle familiar ground. Because once learning has settled, awareness naturally turns toward how thoughts move, and how noticing them gently can begin to change their course. You begin to notice the movement of thought itself, not the content, but the pattern. Thoughts do not arrive once and leave forever. They return. They circle. They repeat like melodies the brain knows by heart. Some of these loops are comforting, like lullabies you have heard since childhood. Others are exhausting, replaying the same worries in slightly different tones. The brain is a pattern-making organ. It looks for predictability, for sequences it can recognize and repeat. When a thought appears often, the brain learns its shape. Neurons fire along familiar routes. The loop strengthens. Soon, the thought seems to arise on its own, without invitation. This can feel as though thoughts control you. But what is really happening is efficiency. The brain is conserving energy by using paths it already knows. Thought loops are not personal failures. They are signs of familiarity. Some loops form around safety, reminders, planning, rehearsing. Others form around threat, regret, anticipation, self-criticism. The brain treats these loops seriously because they have repeated often enough to seem important. Trying to stop a loop directly often makes it louder. Effort adds attention. Attention adds energy. The loop tightens. This is not because you are doing it wrong, but because the brain interprets force as significance. Gentle interruption works differently. Interruption does not fight the loop. It notices it. Awareness steps in quietly, like someone opening a window rather than slamming a door. The loop continues, but it no longer fills the entire room. When you notice a thought looping, something subtle changes. The brain shifts from being inside the loop to observing it. This activates different neural networks, ones associated with perspective and regulation. The loop loses momentum. You are not replacing the thought yet. You are simply not feeding it. Without added attention, the brain receives fewer signals to reinforce the pathway. Over time, the loop softens. This is why noticing matters more than controlling. Control engages struggle. Noticing engages space. Space allows choice. The brain responds to patterns over time. One moment of awareness will not erase a loop, but repeated noticing creates a new pattern. Awareness itself becomes a pathway. You may notice the same thought returning many times. Each time you notice it, the interruption deepens slightly. The brain learns that this loop does not require immediate response. Urgency fades. Some loops dissolve quickly. Others persist. Persistence does not mean failure. It means the pathway has been practiced for a long time. It deserves patience. The body plays a role here too. Thought loops often pair with physical tension. Tight shoulders. Shallow breath. When you soften the body, you send calming signals to the brain. The loop loses support. Breathing slowly can interrupt thought loops without words. Sensation replaces story. The brain shifts focus naturally. Thoughts are not commands. They are signals. They reflect prediction, memory, and habit. You do not have to obey every signal. You can listen and decide. Over time, new loops form. Gentler ones. Slower ones. Thoughts that include space and curiosity. These loops feel different. They do not grip. They pass more easily. The brain learns from this contrast. It begins to prefer the quieter loops because they require less energy. Calm becomes efficient. Nighttime is a powerful moment for this learning. As sleep approaches, thought loops often become more noticeable. The brain is transitioning. Old material surfaces. This is not a problem. It is part of integration. When you meet these thoughts with gentle awareness, you teach the brain how to rest. You show it that nothing needs solving right now. Over time, the baseline changes. Thought loops still arise, but they no longer dominate. There is more space between them. more silence. Silence is not emptiness. It is processing. The brain uses quiet moments to reset, to prepare for new patterns. You do not need to eliminate thinking. Thinking is not the enemy. It is repetition without awareness that creates fatigue. Awareness is the interruption that does not disturb. It allows the loop to finish without pulling you along. As you rest here, thoughts may still drift by. Let them. Notice their shape, their rhythm. No need to follow. No need to push away. The brain understands this posture. It responds by loosening its grip. Neural activity slows. Balance returns. And as thought loops soften, something deeper begins to emerge. A sense of self not defined by patterns, but by presence. Because once loops lose their hold, the brain becomes free to explore something new, something quieter, something shaped not by repetition alone, but by the steady practice of becoming someone gently, slowly, over time. You arrive at this final place without crossing a clear border. There is no doorway, no announcement. Instead, there is a feeling, subtle and steady, that something has been forming all along. Not suddenly. Not loudly. Just patiently. Becoming someone new does not happen in a moment. It happens the way night arrives, gradually, until one day you notice the stars. Identity, as your brain understands it, is not a fixed portrait. It is a pattern in motion. A collection of repeated thoughts, habits, emotional responses, and choices that the brain learns to recognize as familiar. Who you are is not declared once. It is practiced. Neuroscience shows that the brain builds identity the same way it builds any other pattern. Neurons that fire together repeatedly begin to represent you. Reactions you return to often become default responses. Over time, these defaults feel like personality, like character, like truth. But at their core, they are pathways shaped by repetition. This is not meant to unsettle you. It is meant to soften something. Because if identity is practiced, it is also adjustable. Not instantly. Not completely. But gently, over time. The brain does not need you to abandon who you have been. It only needs new experiences repeated often enough to expand who you are becoming. You may have once believed that change requires a dramatic turning point. A decision. A moment of clarity. But the brain does not work that way. It changes through exposure. Through return. Through small behaviors practiced when no one is watching. Every time you pause instead of react, the brain notices. Every time you rest instead of push, the brain notices. Every time you choose curiosity over judgment, the brain notices. These moments do not feel like reinvention. They feel like almost nothing. And yet, they accumulate. The brain builds predictions about you based on what it sees repeatedly. If you often meet difficulty with gentleness, the brain begins to expect gentleness. If you practice self-trust in small ways, the brain updates its model of who you are. Confidence becomes familiarity, not effort. This is why becoming someone new does not feel like pretending for long. At first, new behaviors feel awkward, like wearing clothes that do not yet fit. But repetition reshapes comfort. The brain adjusts its expectations. What once felt unnatural begins to feel neutral. then familiar, then simply like you. Change also becomes quieter. You stop measuring progress in milestones. You begin to notice it in ease, in how quickly you recover, in how often you choose rest, in how little effort it takes to respond differently than you once did. This kind of change does not announce itself because it is not trying to impress anyone. It is trying to stabilize. The brain values stability. It wants patterns that conserve energy and reduce threat. When a new way of being proves safe and repeatable, the brain adopts it willingly. Your future self is not a stranger waiting somewhere ahead. That self is built from what you practice now. The brain does not imagine the future abstractly. It predicts it based on present patterns. Each repeated choice sends a message forward. This means the future feels closer than you think. Not because time collapses, but because identity is cumulative. You are already rehearsing who you will be. The brain is already updating its expectations. Rest plays a crucial role here. When you sleep, the brain integrates identity just as it integrates memory and emotion. It strengthens the pathways you used most. It releases those you did not. Night after night, it quietly edits the story of you. You do not need to control this process. Effort is not required. Consistency is enough. The brain does not need perfection. It needs patterns it can rely on. You may notice moments when old patterns resurface. This does not erase change. It simply means those pathways still exist. The brain does not delete easily. It prefers layering. New pathways can coexist with old ones until they become more efficient. With time, the brain chooses the easier route. Ease is its compass. Whatever feels safest and most practiced becomes the default. This is how identity shifts without force. As you lie here now, becoming quieter, you are still becoming. Breath by breath. Thought by thought. Even in stillness, the brain continues its gentle work, adjusting expectations, refining patterns, preparing for tomorrow. There is no final version of you to reach. The brain does not aim for completion. It aims for adaptation. Who you are remains open, responsive, alive. This openness is not instability. It is resilience. A brain that can change can recover. A self that can adjust can grow without breaking. As sleep deepens, the sense of effort dissolves. You are no longer practicing. You are allowing. The brain takes over, continuing the work in its own quiet language. Neural signals repeat steady rhythms. Familiar patterns strengthen. New ones settle in beside them. Identity hums softly in the background, not as a label, but as a living process. You do not need to hold onto any of this. Understanding is not required now. The brain has received the message. It will carry it forward. And as you drift further into rest, you may sense a gentle reassurance beneath everything else. That change does not demand urgency. That becoming does not require struggle. That even now, in stillness, your brain is continuing its quiet work, shaping tomorrow from the softness of this moment.